build our fleet again. We hope through legal action and diplomatic pressure to be able to get the ships back, the ones that Israel is currently holding, but they've been holding one of our ships since July 2009. They've been holding a Lebanese ship since February 2009. So we don't have a lot of confidence that we'll get it back, but we have to try again. So that's going to take some time. We do hope to be able to launch another mission before the end of the summer, as a means of keeping up the pressure, as a means of launching yet another flotilla, and we will devise a strategy to meet what we think are the changing conditions, and based on the lessons that we've learned, and we've learned a lot of lessons from this last mission. And we will come up with a strategy that will, at base, at the foundation, will do the same thing that all of our missions have done, which is basically to present Israel with a lose-lose situation, right? On the one hand, it could stand aside, as it did with our first 5 missions, and our ships will enter Gaza unimpeded, deliver the humanitarian aid, the cargo that we bring, whatever is on board. Sometimes we've brought Palestinians back to Gaza, Palestinians who've been trapped outside of Gaza and unable to rejoin their families. Sometimes we've taken out of Gaza Palestinians who need medical attention and who can't get it, students who have scholarships to study at university around the world, and we brought them out to go and study. And that is something we hope to be able to continue doing. That if Israel stands aside and doesn't interfere, then we win. We do what we set out to do. We are opening Gaza to the world, giving Palestinians freedom, and the freedom movement. Not all, but hopefully increasing it. The second loss is that if Israel does stop the ships, that it will be exposing to the world its policy of brutality towards the Palestinians. And then, of course, it's not just our job as the organizers, it's the work of all of us as supporters of these missions around the world to engage, to contact their media, to raise awareness in their communities that this is what prison looks like. In any prison, you don't find the prisoners, well, in some prisons you do, but in many prisons you don't find the prisoners starving. And the same is true in Gaza. Palestinians are not starving. They're not starving not only because, and not really because Israel lets in 100 trucks a day. They're not starving because we need to recognize that Palestinians have actually figured out how to break the blockade. They do it through the tunnels. And they've established this tunnel network to bring in the things that they need in Gaza to survive. And we should give credit to the Palestinians, right? That they have figured out how to break the blockade. And, you know, we can support them. But it is a sad state of affairs if people have to exist underground in order to be able to survive, in order to be able to stave off starvation, malnutrition, anemia, all other kinds of diseases that are starting to rise up in Gaza. So we must break this blockade above ground, in the open, and through whatever means that we have at our disposal. As my wife Hueda likes to say, we are the international community. It's not just these governments or states or the UN. We are the international community. And I think we can act. Now, you may not get it from tonight because of this talk so far, but normally I'm one of the most pessimistic people you can meet. I'm normally one of the most cynical people about this stuff, even though I'm an activist, even though I do this all the time, and it's kind of dissonance, right, between my activism and my kind of outlook. But I've been saying this now for probably about a year, because I really believe it at this point. That while not being too hopeful, while not being too optimistic about the situation, I think if we stand back and look at what's happening today, and I would even have said this before this flotilla went, what we have today is a situation where momentum is on our side, where momentum is on the side of justice, of freedom for the Palestinians, and for an end to these policies of blockade, of siege, of occupation, of oppression, of apartheid-type systems, of second-class citizenship, of all of that. Now, just because momentum is on our side doesn't mean we're winning, right? The starting points are so vastly different. Starting points are kind of like this. I mean, it's not even an accurate representation, really. But we're moving this way, and Israel's policies, Israel's governments, Israel, you know, dare I say, even the Israeli public, which really so far is acquiescent to its government for the most part, is moving this way. And what we're seeing in terms of action and activity around the world, the support we see for the flotilla, the outrage, the demonstrations, the kinds of civil society efforts to support Palestine, to support Palestinians, is all part of this momentum going this way. And I think one of the most important aspects of this work, that's changing the momentum, is the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which I encourage you all, if you don't know about it, to start engaging with, to look up, to read the points of unity, to read the principles, and to read the call from Palestinian society for boycott, divestment, and sanction. And I just want to note, I was just talking to my friend Udi, who was in the back, about this earlier. It seems today that the Israeli government has started taking steps, the Israeli Knesset, to criminalize activities for boycott, divestment, and sanctions in Israel. So if you are an Israeli, and there are Israelis, who support BDS, this will now become an illegal activity. And if you are an American or anybody else who's active in BDS, you of course will no longer be allowed into the country, meaning you won't be able to get to the West Bank. Gaza is still a little bit different because of the situation with Egypt, but it's now becoming criminal to work on BDS. And just this past weekend, the main organizer of cultural and musical acts in Israel, Shuki Weiss, who's a promoter, took it to the next level, and he called boycott of the cultural boycott a form of cultural terrorism. Because Israelis are suffering because they can't hear the music of the Pixies, Elvis Costello, and I don't know who else. I guess Leonard Cohen is still willing to go and do his thing, but we need to step that up, and it is stepping up. And I think just the response from artists, from people like the Pixies and the Gorillaz and other acts who've already suspended their tours to Israel in response to this brutal attack on the flotilla, is encouraging. But we need to step it up even more. I'm going to kind of stop here and leave time for questions. But basically, in conclusion, the tide is turning. The more that we can make this a conflict between Israel and the rest of the world, and less of a conflict between Israel. You heard the Israeli spokespeople all week, Michael Oren and others. They want this to be always about Hamas. And if Hamas wasn't there, it would be about Fatah. And if Fatah wasn't there, it would be about PFLP. And if it wasn't PFLP, there's always going to be somebody that Israel wants to make this about. And the more that we can make this not about Palestinians, although it is ultimately about Palestinians, but the more that we can make this conflict, a conflict between, as happened in South Africa, the more we can make this a conflict between Israel as a pariah state and the rest of the world standing up for justice, the more we win. Thank you.